Alright class, we haven't made a video in quite a long time, but now I think our technology is up and running again, so this will be a very low quality video. But as long as it answers the questions you guys have been asking me in class and both through emails about mercantilism. People don't seem comfortable with it, it's a big scary word. People aren't, you guys haven't taken the econ elective yet and asked me to go over it a little bit. So I'm going to go over some of the basics, and actually I'm going to go into it more in depth than you actually need to know for the Unit 2 test. But that's just because I want to make sure there's a clear understanding. And if after this you still have questions, as always, come talk to me and we'll figure it out. So here we go, mercantilism and how it is basically all about economics and power. So let's go to some high quality professional notes on yellow construction paper. Now in history we know that dates and times is always important because it's what's that change over time. So mercantilism, which is basically replaced with capitalism, this was happening in the late 16th century, or actually not the late, but the 16th century to the late 18th century. In our terms, that's the 1500s to the late 1700s. So think of what we've been going on in class. It's basically the exact time period we've been going on through the scientific revolution and the age of exploration, and ending with the times of revolutions like the American and the French Revolution. So if it's about economics and power, it's about governments controlling foreign trade. They had a goal here. The goal was that, high quality professional stuff here. The countries wanted to export more than they imported. That means they wanted to send out more goods for others to buy than they bought themselves to purchase. And there's two big points here. One is that this would be called a favorable balance of trade. It's actually not balanced, which is the irony, I guess. But it would be favorable to that country if they exported more than they imported. They would make a profit. Secondly, which I start here, is that self-sufficiency was important. If you're exporting more than you're importing, you want to have within your country lots of domestic manufacturing. You want to, within your country, or at least amongst all your colonies, to be able to make everything you basically need for your country to be self-sufficient. Think of the country, as awful as this is, as a Walmart. If you go in a Walmart, you're not just going into a Home Depot with building supplies or a ShopRite with just food, right? You're going into a little bit of everything. You can possibly buy milk and a book bag and a shampoo and a desk, right? A little bit of everything at Walmart. Scary analogy. All right. So the whole point of mercantilism is that there's this idea of stuff. There's only so much stuff in the world. There's only so much gold, and that's what countries really wanted. They wanted to acquire as much of that gold and silver as possible. So there was a rivalry for it. If there's only so much, we want to have as much as possible, which will make us the wealthiest and therefore the most powerful country. And one way to do that was to acquire more colonies. We talked about Spain and Portugal and England and the Dutch eventually trying to gather all these colonies. Two big reasons why. For one, colonies had these raw materials. They had things like gold, but also other things like sugar and cotton, whatever else. So if the more stuff you had made you the more powerful, you wanted more colonies that could provide you with more stuff. And also, these colonies meant new markets. In other words, those people that lived there, hey, you could sell your stuff to them. We're going to go over this concept in more detail when we get to imperialism, but it still works and helps to understand this when you learned about mercantilism. Also, if you're in the honors class, it explains mercantilism in the book, and even if you're not, I'll show you guys real quick here. You can pause it if you want to read it. It's in chapter 14 if you're using the online version, but it talks about mercantilism, and here is the basic idea here. We're not going to get into protectionism and all that right now, but it's about having a plentiful supply of bullion, gold and silver. You wanted a favorable balance of trade, where goods exported were of greater than imported, what I just spoke of. Okay, so if you got that, you'll get the basics of what you need to know, at least for this test and to when we learn about this more in the next units. All right, so now that awful question of what do I need to know for the test? Well, if you understand what I just went over, you know what you need to know for the test, but I'll break it down a little bit more into a few things. Number one, understand that this encouraged a rivalry or a competition between European powers. They each wanted to acquire as many colonies as possible. See, those stick figures are European powers, and they're trying to grab land ahead of the others to put it in their bag o' colonies. Next, let's think of the effects. The effects not just of the European powers, but of the people who were colonized. We can talk about social effects, we can talk about geographic effects, political effects. The test does ask about economic effects. So here's an example. When Spain was colonizing Latin America, under mercantilism, those colonies were seen as a source of raw materials and cash crops. That meant a profit and money for Spain, but it did hinder the development of those countries. So when fast forward later on, we'll talk about imperialism, how it was hard for them to gain independence because they were now not self-sufficient, right? You don't have that Walmart in your country if you just have these cash crops. But understand how it affected their economic development and you'll be fine. You'll also find a question on what were colonies through the eyes of these European mercantilist powers. They were markets. In other words, there were people there who would buy their stuff, and they were also sources of raw materials. And oh look, I already went over that with you. So just get that idea and you'll be good. Okay, so the last question is actually a review on the basic principles. So let's go over it real quickly. The review of the basic principles of mercantilism. There's a limited amount of resources in the world, so that led to a competition by European powers and a rivalry to acquire those resources, and therefore their colonies. They also believed that there was a limited amount of wealth in the world. This idea has changed over time, but it was central to this period. They also believed that the government should get involved to regulate trade to make sure that there was more exports than imports. And lastly, the nation's power was measured by its wealth. So it needed to acquire those things so that it would be considered the most powerful. All right, so that's our overview on mercantilism. You can, like I said, also look through my other videos on this stuff. Look in the textbooks. If you even go on YouTube and search mercantilism, there's some excellent videos. Some of them are just 90 seconds. Some are like 18 minutes. But they'll go over it. And if you have more questions, please stop by, ask me, and we can go into this again until you feel comfortable with your understanding of it. All right, and good luck for this test. I know you guys got this.